Tonight we're going to talk on a subject that is of paramount importance in health. I think in many ways the system we'll talk about tonight is one of the least well understood and one of the most truly important ones in terms of your health and how you feel. Tonight we're going to talk about your glands, your gland system. What do glands have to do with? Oh, boy, so many things. Your sex drive, your sex appeal, how you look. Is your skin healthy? Is it dried out? Are you juicy or are you dried up? Do you age well or are you like some prune that's found its last days are already past? Your immunity, can you fight off illnesses and viruses and bugs that are out there, or do they win and you lose? Glands deal with that. How you feel, your energy. Do you have energy? Do you feel stressed out? Do you just not have any resilience left? Or are you tough and energetic and you got plenty of get up and go? Your blood sugar, your reproductive system. For a male, does he have any sex drive or is he bored with it all? And things aren't really working, and things that should be standing up some of the time are always lying down. For a woman, you're talking about menstrual problems, menstrual pain, periods that don't come, periods that come all the time, or come irregularly, or show up every week, or then don't show up for 6 months. Menstrual periods that cause lots of pain and back pain, abdominal pain, and misery. All the PMS, premenstrual syndrome stuff. You're talking about swelling here and pain there. You're talking about emotions when you talk about glands. Are you well demeanored or are you sort of out of sorts most of the time? Are you bitchy for no reason? Do you watch a McDonald's commercial and find yourself crying for no reason? That happens when gland imbalances occur, that a person just suddenly could find themselves crying and they don't even have a reason for it. Their temper just won't even hold up. Glands, again, can play into all of these. How about inflammations? You've got chronic inflammatory illnesses. You could have colitis, you could have arthritis, you could have an ovarian cyst, you can have an inflamed shoulder, an inflamed wrist. You could have what's called carpal tunnel syndrome. You don't know why you're working on your computer and now your wrists are the ones that hurt, but the person next to you doesn't, sitting right next to you doing the same job. Theirs don't hurt. Could be glands. Often is glands. Talk about a poorly understood system by most people. Yes. Poorly understood by most of their doctors and physicians? Yes. Poorly treated in the healthcare system so much of the time? Absolutely. People put on drugs for gland problems when they should have their glands repaired, but nobody even thought of repairing them? Happens all the time. People who end up with surgeries and they should have never been cut on, and they're taking out their gallbladder and snipping out their colon and taking out organs of their body and taking out ovaries that should have been saved. Happens all the time. And why? Because we don't, most of us, have the owner's manual for our glands. We all own this gland system, and most of us don't have really the first practical clue of what's going on with it, what needs to be happening with it to be well, what it's telling us, what the symptoms are when it starts to go wrong, and what we could do about it to get it right. So we're going to cover all of that this evening. It's a tall order to do in 90 minutes, but I know we'll cover it well, and I know that by the time we're done, you're going to know much more about your gland system than most anybody you personally know, and probably more than your doctors have known in terms of practical knowledge about glands. So when you're talking about glands, you're talking about a very, very important health-creating system. Those of you that were here last week when we first started the series, as we did last Tuesday, we talked about the human nerve system. And I told you it was, your nerve system, your brain and your nerves, the single most important controlling and communicating system in your body. It is. Today we're going to talk about the second most important controlling and communicating system in your body, and that's your glands. And do the two of them work separately? They don't have anything to do with each other? Your nerves are over here and your glands are over there, and the two of them never even talk to each other? Not at all. They're joined very closely at various points that we'll look to touch on with you tonight and explain to you tonight. They're tied together. They're almost like Siamese twins. Siamese twins that are joined at the hip and you can't separate them. You can't really separate fully nerves and gland function because they cross over and they're joined together. And I want to cover some of those conjoining points tonight so you can see how these two systems that enable you to feel good, enjoy life, be happy, be out of pain, have your body work the way it should, these two systems work together, your nerves and your glands. How about giving me the names of some glands? Call out the names of some glands to me that you know. What was one? Pituitary is one of them. That's right. Give me another gland. Thyroid is one. Give me another gland. Adrenal is definitely, the adrenals are definitely important glands. Give me some other glands. Thymus, definitely a gland. Give me another gland. How about ovaries? How about testes? Are they glands? Yep, absolutely. Give me some other glands. Got any others you can think of? Pineal gland, absolutely. Give me another gland you can think of. How about the pancreas? Definitely a gland. Yeah. How about some other glands you can think of? How about sweat glands? Absolutely. How about some other glands? What was that? Sweat? Yeah. How about salivary glands that give you saliva? Sure. How about some other glands? How about the oil glands on your skin? Huh? Tear glands in your eyes? Yeah. How about, what's that? Olfactory glands? Not so much, but you know what? There are some other glands would be, you got a lot of digestive ones that make up digestive juices. For instance, the pancreas is also over on this side of this page that I'm making. And so is your liver. So is your gallbladder over on this side. Lymph glands definitely exist as glands, for sure, for sure. Stomach is actually one of your digestive glands also. Prostate gland, you betcha. Now over on this side of this board, I've written one group of glands, and I've tried to separate out on the other side a second group. What is it that both of them have in common? Why do we call these glands and these glands? When you have, in the human body, a group of cells all grouped together, they're all joined together and they form an organ, and that organ has a job, and its job is to make some kind of liquid goo to do some kind of job for you in your body. It's a gland. When a group of cells are joined together and they make up some kind of liquid goo that does something for you in terms of your body's health, we call it a gland because it makes or secretes this liquid. Now on this side, I've written the group of glands we call the endocrine glands. And they do something fairly unique. I think you told me red doesn't look too good on tape, does it? Can you see red? They put their liquid into your blood. The endocrine glands make their liquid goo to go into your blood vessels, to go through your blood, to go through your arteries, travel through your arteries and veins, and travel through your body in the blood. And when they make a liquid called a hormone, which is a chemical messenger, a hormone is made by one of these glands called the endocrine glands, makes up these chemical messengers that tiny little drops of them go into your blood and carry information to different parts of your body saying, do this, do that, do something else. A hormone is a chemical message deliverer, and it goes in your bloodstream and it tells some parts of your body, do something. And this group over here, these are the ones we're going to spend a lot of time on tonight. The endocrine glands make these little tiny drops of things called hormones that make huge differences in your health. Little tiny drops, if they're present or missing, will determine whether or not you're in pain, whether or not you're depressed, whether or not you're horny, whether or not you're exhausted, whether or not you got energy, whether your hair is falling out. A lot of different things are going to be determined by these chemical messengers called hormones. Now this other side of the page are also glands. They make liquid goos for some other purposes. They can cool you off in the heat. Saliva can help you break down your food. Oil on your skin will keep it lubricated. Tears on your eyes will keep them from drying up and so that you don't go blind. All of these are important. Digestive juices that come out of your stomach and your gallbladder and your liver, very important, because without them you wouldn't digest food. But we're not going to spend time talking about all these other juices today. They are important. Some of them absolutely essential to life. I just saw a patient who has terrible cramps in her legs. Well, she's got a stomach problem. And her stomach problem is that her stomach isn't going to make enough stomach acid to bring calcium into her blood so that her muscles don't cramp. Well, if you can't sleep at night because your muscles cramp up, you could become a pretty miserable person. It's not the only problem she's got. It's one of the problems she's got. So don't think these are unimportant, but we are going to just sort of discard of them with a sweep of the eraser here. And we're going to spend our time talking about these endocrine glands that make up tiny drops of hormones which determine huge changes in your health. Because this is a system well worth understanding. We all own one of these, but most of us don't know what it takes to keep them running right. And once they start to go wrong because we didn't know what to do to keep them running right, we don't know what to do about that either. But by the time you're done tonight, I think you'll know both. Now we'll start out with a gland that I like to start out with because A, it's important, and B, in some ways it's pretty simple and easy to understand. Simple because it produces one main hormone. We're going to talk about the gland called your thyroid gland. Thyroid gland, it sits here in your throat. Feel your throat. Can you feel your thyroid gland? You hope not. Really. Because you aren't going to feel it particularly unless it's swollen. And if it's swollen and too big, it's got a problem. What do you feel when you feel this area? Something sort of hard, right? There's a cartilage armor plate that sits on top of your thyroid that you feel there. And underneath it sits this gland, which is described as having a right side, a left side, and a middle connecting section. So your thyroid's got a right, a left, and a middle section. And it's usually described as a butterfly-shaped gland. It looks like two little wings and a connecting section. That's your thyroid. What's it doing for you? Pretty important gland, the thyroid. In fact, when your doctors run blood tests on you, guess which gland they always check, and they usually don't bother checking one other ever on you. They always check the thyroid. That's the only one they check. Should that be the only one they check? Oh boy, are they missing the boat? It's an important one, but they actually miss the most important ones that they should have been checking. And all they do check is the thyroid, but it's an important gland. What does it do? It runs the idle adjustment on your body. Thyroid hormone. What's the thyroid gland going to do? It's an endocrine gland. What's it going to do? It's going to make a what? Hormone, right? What is a hormone? Little drop of a oily liquid that goes into your blood and tells your body something to do. What does it tell your body to do? Thyroid hormone. How many of you know the name of it? Thyroxine, right? Thyroxine is the name of thyroid hormone. If you say thyroid hormone, you're talking about thyroxine. If you say thyroxine, you're talking about thyroid hormone. Those words mean the same thing. Thyroid hormone, thyroxine, tells all the cells of your body how fast their engines go, how fast their engines run. It's sort of weird. I always thought it was sort of weird that you have 1 trillion living cells in one human body. You got 1 trillion. You got 1 trillion. You got 1 trillion living cells. These are tiny things. You need a microscope to see a cell, right? And every one of those trillion, not 1,000, don't add just 3 more zeros and come to 1,000,000. Don't add just 3 more and have 9 zeros and come to 1,000,000,000. Add 3 more zeros and come to 1 trillion cells in your body. Every one of those cells has its own little engine. It's like its own little car. It's pretty funny when you think about it. You know, you'd think there'd be one engine and it would run 1 trillion cells. No, every cell has its own little engine in it where it can burn fuel and throw out carbon dioxide and waste and generate energy inside that one cell, and the other trillion next to it all have to generate energy and burn fuel and throw off waste and generate energy and then do the work they've got to do, whatever work that particular cell has as its design and its job. Thyroid hormone, thyroxine, talks to 1 trillion cells. I mean, this one's pretty funny. When thyroxine talks, everybody listens. There are other hormones we're going to talk about that isn't true. They talk to particular areas, and other areas largely just ignore it altogether. But not with thyroxine. Every cell in the body listens to thyroxine. The more thyroxine you got in your blood, the more thyroid hormone in your blood, the faster the engines inside every cell rev up. Like the idle adjustment on an engine. You got a little screw in that engine, and it's supposed to be set. The factory tells you how fast an engine is supposed to go. It's supposed to revolve, turn over 1,000 times a minute. That doesn't mean 600 when it's standing still and just idling and you got your foot on the brake. It's not supposed to go 600. It doesn't mean 2,000. If they set that engine to turn over 1,000 times a minute, they got to set that idle adjustment so it spins 1,000 times a minute. And thyroid hormone tells your body how fast everything idles. Glands, when you start out with them, to understand them, they're a 3 little bears kind of story. Remember the 3 little bears? They're always, looking for porridge and they're looking for beds. And the porridge shouldn't be too hot and it shouldn't be too cold. Thyroid hormone, you're supposed to have just right amounts of it. Shouldn't be too much, shouldn't be too little. Either one's going to make a problem, because if your cells are moving too fast, you got a problem. If your cells are moving too slow, you got a problem. And thyroid hormone sets the idle adjustment for all the cells in your body. What happens with thyroid hormone? Let's go through it, because in this audience there are a number of people who have had thyroid problems, and one of them who it nearly killed her. One of the interesting things in understanding glands is understanding how they are controlled. How is it that thyroid hormone in every healthy person, you draw their blood and measure the amount, and in every healthy person it's always going to be the same amount? And if it goes too high or too low, you got a sick person. How does that even happen? Well, it happens because thyroid hormone is under control. It's not just whatever happened, it's being controlled. And I think as you look at thyroid hormone, you can conclude some pretty important things before we're done tonight. One thing I think you can conclude as you look at thyroid hormone is a rather important conclusion about life and about health. And that is that life is intelligent. Wow, that sounds like a pretty wild statement. Life is intelligent. Some of you go, yeah. Some of you go, Some of you go, no. What am I talking about? Life is intelligent. Well, the fact that thyroid hormone isn't all over the map day and night, week after week, I think as you look at it with me in the next few moments, you're going to figure out this thing is intelligently under control. And we'll look at the control system that's keeping our thyroid hormone where it belongs and what goes wrong with it when it's not working right. Because thyroid hormone in all healthy people always stays right around the same normal level. Doesn't matter whether it's morning, midnight, nighttime, breakfast time, lunchtime, dinner time, no matter what time it is, thyroid hormone tends to stay level in all healthy people. It stays right around the same number. How does it do that? How does it do it in a person who is an Eskimo and they eat fish, and a person who's a vegetarian and they eat rice, and a person who's an all-American eater at Denny's and they eat hamburgers and French fries? How could thyroid hormone, a person who eats 5 times a day, a person who eats twice a day, how could thyroid hormone tend to stay normal across the boards in billions of individuals with different lifestyles and different eating habits? Well, it's because it's being controlled. When I say life is intelligent, and you can view that by the fact that things are under control, you know, you might look at this room tonight, and you walk into this room and you see all these chairs, and they're all in sort of rows. And you see this whiteboard up here, and you see these tables up here. Now, you might be some wild, far-thinking scientist, and you go, well, I got a theory of what happened here tonight. These chairs whirled through space, and they happened to whirl into this room, and they landed here. And this table whirled through space, and randomly it arrived here. And this whole thing, this whiteboard whirled through space, and it somehow just plopped down here. And, you know, that'd be a pretty interesting theory. You could actually probably teach at a college and explain this to people. You could even get some people to debate it with you for a few 100,000 hours. But you might look at this room and you'd say, you know what? I have a sneaking suspicion that these chairs were put here in rows for a reason. This table is at the front. This whiteboard's at the front. These tables are over here set up this way for a reason. They all seem to be facing each other. I have a feeling an intelligence designed this and set it up to be this way. And, you know, you'd have to figure out who was right. Did they whirl through space and randomly arrive? Did some intelligence design this and put it here this way? It's a tough decision to make. You take a look at thyroid hormone, and I think you'll have as tough a decision to make. So you got a thyroid gland, and it's supposed to be putting out exactly the right amount. Let's just call it 100 units for purposes of discussion. An exact amount of thyroid hormone, give or take a little bit, for you to be healthy. And that's the amount in your blood all the time. How the heck does it ever stay that way? It turns out that there's an identifiable control system for the thyroid hormone. We know that it stays that way. We know how it stays that way. It's been scientifically all worked out. We know that there are specialized nerves, and scientists call them gland-stat nerves. Those are the words they're using for it. Gland-stats. What do they mean, a gland-stat nerve? This system works like a thermostat works to control the temperature in this room. I've met a few people in my days who don't understand thermostats, so let's just cover them pretty quick. We got a room here, and someone set that thermostat at 70 degrees. It's a hot summer's day. The sun is beating down on this room, and it starts to get hotter. It goes from 70 up to 71. We've got an air conditioner, and when that temperature goes up to 71, it clicks on a switch. The wires tell the air conditioner to turn on. The air conditioner starts blowing out a bunch of cold air. The temperature goes from 71 back down to 70. The switch turns off those wires. They're not telling the air conditioner to blow any more cold air. The air conditioner stops blowing. The sun's still beating down. Temperature goes back up again to 71. The whole thing starts again. Turns on the air conditioner blows cold air, brings it back down to 70. And if you look at that temperature all day long, it's going 70, 71, 70, 71, 70. It's always just under control. In a narrow range. It heats up a little and the air conditioner is told to go on. And then it cools off a little and the air conditioner is told to go off. And that's what we call a thermostat, right? And when we connect a thermostat up to an air conditioner or a heating unit and set it at a given temperature, It senses when that temperature goes up a little bit, and it tells the air conditioner what to do. We have specialized nerves in our body whose sole and only job of those nerves are the little electrical sensors and communicators in the body, the wiring system, the computer system. We've got specialized nerves in our body. You open up any medical textbook, they'll tell you they've been discovered, they know what they are, that measure the amount of thyroid hormone that you have in your blood. And those gland stat nerves measure the amount of thyroid hormone, and if they need more, they tell the thyroid, give me some more. And if they got all they need, they tell the thyroid, take it easy, pal. We got plenty in the blood just now. And just like this thermostat tells the air conditioner, turn on, turn off, make it cooler, now but don't bother, we're cool enough, now cool it down again. The gland stat system of your body is going to tell your thyroid when you need more thyroxine and when you got plenty. It's being controlled. There's feedback. There's information being measured, and then feedback and information sent to the thyroid that's going to tell it what to do. Now let's say you've got a person and they're getting very sluggish and they're tired, they're putting on weight, they can't drag themselves out of bed, they're feeling worn out, they're feeling depressed. And that person goes over to the doctor runs some blood tests, draws some blood, sends it off to the lab, says come back in a week. You come back a week later and he says, well, we found out what's wrong. And you say, really, what's wrong, doc? And he says, well, your thyroid hormone's too low. You're supposed to be up here. You're down here. We ran a test, you got too little. And you go, really? Well, what do I do, doc? And he says, that's easy. And he takes out his little prescription pad and he writes you a prescription, he hands it to you. And what is it for? Actually, it gives you thyroid hormone. He says, well, if you're here at 60 and you should be at 100, we'll give you this much. We'll make up the difference, and now you're normal. Just take one of these little pills. How often? Every day. For how long? How long usually? The rest of your life. That's right. How many of you were ever put on Synthroid or thyroid hormone or Armour thyroid? 1, 2, any more of you? 2 of you only? It's a lot of people put on thyroid hormone, quite a lot, because the blood test comes back low and they write a prescription, say take this stuff. Well, that's a pretty simple solution. It's almost a third grade solution, isn't it? It's a 2 + 2 = 4 kind of solution. Well, if you should be 4 and you only got 2, let's give you the other 2 and you'll be at 4. Pretty simple. Sounds very logical. Very simple. I mean, couldn't come up with a simpler idea than that. Let's just give you the amount you need. Problem is, it's not necessarily taking into account life. It's not taking into account this feedback system. It's not taking into account that your body is controlling all this. It'd be a good solution if you had a leg that was too short on this table. You go, well, 2 inches too short. Let's make another 2 inches and jam it under there and it'll be fine. Works pretty well with tables and bowls of sugar. But it might be a little different when you're dealing with life, which is intelligently set up to control this. And something is wrong. Where just giving the person the hormone may not be the best solution by any means, because is it really going to fix their problem? Going to fix the cause of what's wrong with them? No. Just give them some hormone. That, what? Their body should have been making that hormone, right? That's what you want. You want your body making the right amount of hormone. You don't want somebody giving you the missing amount of hormone. Now, on the other side of this equation, by the way, when you get thyroxine as a prescription, and there's 2 ways they provide it. One's become much more popular now. They can either take thyroid hormone from little pigs. They go to the Armour Star people that make Armour hams and Armour Star Franks, and they get little piggy thyroid and they put it into pills and they give it to you. Or, more commonly, they use something called Synthroid, which is made in a laboratory, and it's again thyroid hormone, but it's a synthetic. It's made up out of chemicals. Now what happens when a person takes Synthroid? You know, and it brings them up from 60 to 100. Are all their problems gone? They feel like $1,000,000, right? Everything's great now, right? Well, unfortunately, that's not usually the way it turns out. What you tend to find with people who take thyroid hormone from outside the body is much of the time they're not that happy. Yes, their blood levels look better on blood tests. Yes, certain symptoms may improve, but they still often feel horrible. Their get up and go still got up and went. They still don't feel good. Why? Because you didn't really fix their gland system. You just put a crutch in under their arm and you try not to look too closely so you don't see that they're hobbling along on this crutch. You haven't really fixed the problem. Well, thyroxine, just like so many things in medicine, when you write a drug prescription and you give someone a drug, many times you're dealing with the symptom, you're not dealing with the cause. In this case, the symptom is the person's low in thyroxine. Their body isn't producing the right amount and keeping the right amount in their blood. That's the symptom. And when they give you thyroxine, they're just fixing that one symptom, but not necessarily treating the cause. The cause would be, well, why isn't that body building the right amount of thyroxine? It looks like it has a thyroid gland. It looks like all the parts are there. Why isn't it building thyroxine? And the person next to it is. And if you can answer that, you could be dealing with the cause of the problem. Well, what could be the cause? Well, let's talk about some things that can cause problems. Let's talk about what happened with the thyroid gland in the history of this country. We got to a point where instead of everybody being a farmer and this and that, became an industrialized society, and people weren't growing all their food in the backyard. Not everybody had their own animals and vegetables and so forth back behind the house. And instead we began to have an industrialized food system. And what happened? Food would be grown over in this part of the country, processed at some factory or bakery over there, packaged, loaded up on a truck, driven across country, and a weird thing began to happen to people's thyroid glands. What happened was people in the middle of the country, people who lived in places like Milwaukee and Cleveland, began to develop this weird thyroid problem where their thyroids would get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they could grow these giant thyroid glands underneath their throat. They could grow as big as a basketball underneath their throat. A problem known as what? A goiter, right? What was happening there? Why were these people in the middle parts of the country who weren't on the coast, east or west coast, developing goiters? Well, we know for one thing, something very important. For the thyroid gland to make thyroxine, it must make it out of an element called iodine. Iodine is a red. Can you see that at all on your camera when it's in red? Yeah. Iodine is a red element. You've seen iodine. You painted it onto cuts, right? It really is red. It's a red mineral. It exists on planet Earth, and it exists mainly in the ocean. It exists in the sea. Iodine is in seawater, and it gets into people. We need iodine to build thyroxine. Your thyroid gland will build no thyroid hormone at all if it has no iodine. If it doesn't have enough iodine, it can't make enough thyroxine because iodine is essential for the recipe for your thyroid gland to make thyroid hormone. It can't make thyroid hormone without it. It has no way to do it if there's no iodine. Well, iodine gets into the human body mainly in any quantity at all in seafood. That means you get it in sea fish, fish that live in the sea, not ones that come out of some river inland and freshwater fish. They don't have any great amount of iodine in them. Sea fish or sea plants, seaweed. Americans historically weren't much seaweed eaters. Japanese did that. Other cultures eat some seaweed, but Americans historically weren't big seaweed eaters. Now some of us eat it or have it in our supplements, in our food supplements. Kelp, that's seaweed. But we get iodine in our diet in quantity in sea fish and seaweed. People who live in the middle of the country weren't getting iodine in their food. Why is that? Well, there's not much. As you move farther and farther from the ocean, there's less and less iodine in the soil. And a very interesting thing about iodine is this. Iodine is what we call a volatile element. It evaporates into a gas. It's sort of a weird, greasy, I think it's called a metal, but it's a greasy red stuff that isn't exactly hard. When you touch it in your fingers, it becomes this red mush. And it boils at a temperature that is lower than the boiling temperature of water. That means when you heat food up to a temperature where there's steam coming off the food, boiling temperature, you are over the temperature that boils iodine up into where? The air. It goes off as a gas. So when you take foods that have low amounts of iodine in them and you cook them and then package them and then store them and ship them and feed them to people that lived in the middle parts of the country, they were getting food with no iodine in it. There wasn't much to start with, and a little bit was there, had been cooked and evaporated out. And what happened? The thyroid gland is trying to produce thyroxine, but it doesn't have the material it needs to produce thyroxine. What does the gland stat say? We don't have enough. There's not enough thyroxine in the blood. What does it tell the thyroid? Make me more, dude. I need some stuff. Thyroid says, okay, boss, but still doesn't have any raw material. Couldn't make it if it wants to. And for some weird reason, we'll go into that weird reason before we're done tonight, the thyroid gland decides to become, well, if I can't make any, I'll just become a bigger factory and a bigger factory and a bigger factory until you got this huge gland still doing what? It can't produce any thyroxine. There's no iodine. Now that was considered a pretty undesirable thing. It's not all that desirable to walk around with a basketball under your chin all the time. Hard to kiss anybody, not exactly a pleasant way to live. And so the U.S. government, in a moment of nutritional wisdom and understanding, said this. Well, if these guys are going to eat ham and eggs for breakfast and hamburgers and fries and steak and potatoes for dinner and some, steamed broccoli from God knows where, they're probably going to end up throwing salt on those burgers and salt on those fries and salt in those eggs. Let's pass a law where we add iodine into people's salt. And that's a law. And that's why when you look at that jar of salt in the grocery store and you see that little Morton girl with the umbrella, it says iodized salt. There's not iodine in regular salt that comes out of the earth. They add iodine into your salt so that when you sprinkle it on your food, you'll have something for your thyroid gland to make thyroxine out of. And when that law was passed, the so-called goiter belt in the center of the country where people were building these huge thyroid glands began to become a much smaller problem. The problem, by and large, vanished because people had iodine. What's the point in that discussion? Well, there are a couple points, but one of the obvious ones is this. There are nutritional needs of each of your glands. If you don't have nutritionally what your gland needs, it couldn't possibly live up to its job in life, could it? If you don't give a thyroid any iodine, doesn't matter how brilliant it is, it's stuck. It can't do the job. And that's a nutritional issue. That's getting iodine into your diet. Its natural source, if the government didn't add it into your table salt, would be what? Seafood. You'd eat some seaweed. You'd eat some sea fish. By the way, the amount of iodine that it takes to build the thyroxine that you need is measured in micrograms. You know how little that is? A gram is usually a little tiny cube of something that big. 1,000th of a gram is a milligram. 1,000th of a milligram is a microgram. That's 1,000,000th of a gram. So you're not talking huge amounts of iodine you got to have in your body, but you got to have those little amounts that you would get out of seafood or sea fish, eating it some of the time or getting it into your system in some way. By the way, a lot of you in here are on supplements. I don't think a patient comes into my office that isn't given the right nutritional supplements is being treated, because nutrition is so important to health. A lot of you take a product called Mintran, and you'll look at it and you'll see, oh, that's calcium and magnesium. And that has a very big importance for keeping nerves working right, keeping your spine working right, keeping your nerves from going nuts on you, pain, all kinds of things in your body could tell you that you need calcium and magnesium in your blood. But you'll notice added to Mintran is kelp, seaweed, so that you have a trickle of some iodine going in every time you take your supplements, because it pays to have seaweed-sourced iodine if you're going to have a healthy thyroid gland. Now, on the other side of this equation, but we talked a bit about the low side. Well, they'll give you Synthroid, give you a prescription, and write a prescription for Synthroid if you're too low, what we call a hypothyroid illness, a hypothyroid individual, a person who has hypothyroidism, too little thyroid hormone, hypothyroid. What's on the other side of this Three Little Bears story? Well, hyper, right. You got a person who's running way too fast. You're sitting down and your heart should beat maybe 70 times a minute while you're sitting still. Pretty average sort of heartbeat, 70 beats a minute. What happens if your heart's beating 145 times a minute? How fast was yours beating? 120. 120 times a minute when you're sitting still. 140. 115. Sitting still. You didn't just run the marathon. You didn't just climb 50 stairs. You're sitting down for an hour, and your heart's going double time. I mean, for an athlete, what is their heartbeat? Maybe 60 times a minute, 65, maybe even lower. Could get it lower. You're in a good shape. But how about going double time, sitting still? Well, that's a person who has a hyperthyroid condition. There's too much thyroid hormone. Some Chinese wise man was once credited with the concept that there are only two types of disease: diseases of too much and diseases of too little. And when you look at glands, you find that in their most basic understanding, you can start right there. Are the glands producing the right amount of hormone, or are they producing too much, or are they producing too little? Now, the hyperthyroid individual's having a rough time. They may not sleep real well. They're pretty shaky and jittery. You sort of look at them and you go, wow, am I looking at a person or a hummingbird? They're rattling apart. This person's depressed and gaining weight and unhappy, the hypothyroid individual. What happens to the hyperthyroid individual? Well, they're sort of just falling apart. They're wasting away. Now, if you turn that idle adjustment too high on an engine, and you just have that engine cranking over 2,000 times a minute when it should be going 1,000, how's the life of that car? Short, isn't it? What's happening to that car? Burns up, right? It's overheated. Oil's getting too hot. Parts are burning up. You're not going to get 100,000 miles out of that engine. You'll be lucky to get 35,000. You'll throw it away. Guess what happens to hyperthyroid individuals? They die. Of what? Heart attack. Their hearts rattle apart going that fast. Is thyroid important? Oh yeah, we're talking about a very important gland that you're supposed to have the right amount of thyroid hormone. Now, if you go to a doctor and you look like a hummingbird and they draw some blood and they send it to the lab and you come back a week later and say, we know what's wrong with you. You've got hyperthyroidism. And one of our patients here has the form of it called Graves' disease, a form of hyperthyroidism. Do they know what causes Graves' disease? What did they tell you causes it? They don't know. Those of you that were here last week, we discussed a very interesting fact about modern medicine in its state of the art. the way it is today in 1997, 50% of all the diseases in all the medical books have the same cause. Unknown. And when she had hyperthyroidism and they gave it a name, like when you give it a name Graves, it sounds like they know a lot, right? I mean, now it's got a name. You must know a lot about it. But what do we know? What causes it? We don't know. That's what the medical texts say. And when they wanted to treat her, what did they say? Did they want to treat the cause of it? No, we don't know what causes it. So what did they want to do to your thyroid gland?
Suppress it with a pill.
Didn't they want to nuke it? They wanted to irradiate it, right? You had to talk them out of that. Yeah. There's two things you can do with hyperthyroidism. So you show up to the doctor's office, and he says, well, your thyroid's going too fast. We're going to schedule you for surgery on Monday. And you go, wow, really? Cool. Sign me up. And what happens Monday? Takes a scalpel, opens up the throat, whacks off part of the thyroid, throws it in the wastebasket, stitches you back up, and sends you on your way. What's the point? Well, the point is this. Well, here you are. You got 200. You're supposed to be at 100. I guess you're going to need to lose half that thyroid gland. You got twice as much as you probably need, pal. I mean, look, you got twice as much thyroxine as you need. Whack. Half of it goes. Oh, you got 60% more than you need. Whack. Let's cut off that much of this person's thyroid. You think this is for real? Yeah. People come in here, they got scars on their throats. They really went through thyroid surgery. They really cut out some or all of their thyroid gland, really did throw it in a wastebasket, really did stitch them up and send them on their way and get paid good money for it. Well, I see. Again, we're back to this third grade arithmetic thing. See, 200 minus 100 equals 100. If you got too much, then we should just figure out how much of your thyroid gland we whack off and we throw that away and you'll be fine. It's pretty simple. It's two, this time it's 4 minus 2 equals 2. Pretty easy. You know, it's just simple arithmetic again. What's another choice? The choice that they recommended to KT back there. Well, we know something about the thyroid gland. It needs what to make thyroxine? Iodine. So since we figured out how to make nuclear energy and build atomic bombs, we could come up with some real cool medical uses for this thing instead of just blowing up the planet. The doctor can go over to his friendly neighborhood nuclear reactor and order some radioactive iodine and get it in liquid form or pill form and say, here's what we're going to do for you, Kath. Take these pills for the next 4 days, and we're going to fix your high thyroid condition. And you go, wow, really? Yeah. Oh, cool. Let me have them. And what does he do? He gives you radioactive iodine, knowing what? The human body, which I think you will conclude before we're done if you haven't already, is intelligent. And part of that intelligence you can see in the fact that it does things in a very designed way. One of the things the human body does is like a vacuum cleaner. It sucks up all your iodine from your food and sucks it all up and puts it in your thyroid gland. If you analyze a human body to find out where the iodine is in it, you'll find it in 2 places. In the thyroid gland, or circulating in your blood as thyroxine, as part of your thyroid hormone. Those are the only 2 places you find iodine. It doesn't hang out anywhere else. Your thyroid is an intelligent vacuum cleaner. It sucks up all the iodine in your diet. So they go, hey, here's a cool thing. We'll get this deadly radioactive iodine, and your thyroid will suck it all up. And we're going to set off a nuclear war in your throat, and we're going to nuke your thyroid and kill off a scientifically measured amount of your thyroid gland. I always love it when medicine thinks it's scientific and everybody else isn't. Like scientific means necessarily wonderful. Yeah, it's scientific that you could destroy somebody's thyroid gland with radioactive iodine. That is science. Is it necessarily wonderful? Well, maybe not. Maybe really not. I mean, can you build an atomic bomb or a bunch of nuclear weapons and blow this whole planet completely out of the galaxy? You probably could. Is that scientific? Oh yeah. Is it necessarily wonderful? Well, make your own mind up. Maybe not. Science doesn't always mean 4 minus 2 equals 2. Yeah, that's true, but that doesn't always mean that was the best choice for you. That just means that particular fact is true. Doesn't mean it's necessarily the right thing to do. Now imagine how scientific this is. On this person we want to destroy 60% of their thyroid. On this person we want to destroy 30% of their thyroid. On this person we want to destroy 80% of their thyroid. And we've got to build the exact level of nuclear war to go in that person's throat to kill that amount of their thyroid, and figure out how scientific that gets. You going to get it right? You going to get it right every time? You going to miss? Oops. Is this body a little different than that one? Oh, maybe. So even the scientific part of that leaves a little bit to be desired, because it's a little hard to measure the exact nuclear war you want in somebody's throat. Now Katie came to me, I met her Sunday, and she had Graves' disease. I'm going to tell you another interesting hyperthyroidism story in a moment. And she decided she didn't want him to nuke her thyroid. And she decided instead she'd take a drug to lower her thyroid activity, and she'd go explore some other options. And she explored these nutritional options, and she kept her thyroid gland. And now she's down to a tiny amount of that drug, and she kept her thyroid gland. I want to tell you a little different story. I met a woman, actually I saw her this week because she drops in here now and again, not to fix her thyroid. But when I met Donna, it was one of the wackiest stories I've ever seen in terms of health. And I've seen some wacky ones. I mean, every week I see some wacky ones, but this one's certainly up there on the whack scale. She had hyperthyroidism, Graves' disease. And they decided to nuke her thyroid. And they went for complete destruction. They gave her the amount of radioactive iodine to kill every cell in her thyroid for now and all time. That was their decision. And when they're done with that, what do you have to do? Take Synthroid the rest of your life, because you're not going to have any thyroid hormone because they killed your whole gland off. So they put her on radioactive iodine, they nuked her thyroid to bits, and put her on Synthroid for the rest of her life. Now many of you know on some level that people who have hyperthyroidism get these bulging eyes going on. Remember the actor Marty Feldman? He had those big bulging wacky looking eyes. Because when you get hyperthyroidism, a pad of fat will build up behind the eyeball. It'll start pushing the eyeball forward. And that can become a heck of a problem, because it can push it so far forward it'll snap the eyeball right off the optic nerve. It'll unwire it and the person go completely blind. Not a good deal. So with my patient Donna, this was before I met her, a few years before I met her, they nuked her thyroid and her eyes were already bulging. So her thyroid specialist scheduled her for a surgery. And what they did was they went into her skull, they plucked the eyeballs out of her head, they took a chisel and a hammer and they chiseled out the back of her eye sockets, removing all the bone at the back of her eyes, pulled all the bone out from her skull, and then dropped her eyes back in her head. Sounds pretty wild. When she walked into my office a few years after all this had gone on, her eyes were like this. They were all squinched this way and that. Her eyelids were all twisted. Nothing fit right. She said every time she looked in the mirror, she wanted to puke. She really hated it. And she met me, and it happened to be the day I was teaching this class, which was pretty funny. I said, "You really need to be at this class tonight." She was there, and she says, Arlo, why didn't I meet you 3 years ago before I did all this dumb stuff?" She said, "I really wanted to find alternatives. I couldn't find any alternatives." The things we're talking about tonight, it's hard to find out about. I mean, it's sort of, you will find that this information isn't so widely available, unfortunately. So she comes to me and her thyroid, she's on Synthroid all the rest of her life. Her eyes are all screwed up, and she's going back to the same surgeon that messed up her eyes to do another surgery. And I said, Donna, knock it off. Quit going back to that surgeon. You need an artist. She's not fixing your eyes. And we sent her to a good plastic surgeon. Eventually they leveled out her eyes, because by then you had to clean up the mess they had made. And she came to me and she says, you know, I feel terrible. They nuked my thyroid. I'm on this Synthroid. I have no energy. My female system sucks. I feel awful. I feel like warmed over caca. She says, this is no good deal. She went through all this treatment to feel just horrible anyhow. She says, are you going to be able to fix me? I said, well, I'm pretty darn sure we're going to help get you feeling much better. Are you going to be able to fix my thyroid gland? I said, that I highly doubt. They killed it. They nuked it. No one expects it to live. I said, I highly doubt that. But she says, well, I just want to feel better. And I tested her glands the way I'll show you in a minute tonight. We test glands, and I started putting her on some nutrients. And sure enough, she got to feel much better. In fact, her whole personality changed, her energy level changed, her sex drive changed. Everything started to come back to normal. Once you've been through this kind of problem, hyperthyroidism and surgery and drugs, you keep going back to your thyroid specialist. You're expected to do that the rest of your life. She went back to her thyroid specialist a few months after she and I started working, and I put her on some of these supplements that we use to repair damaged glands. I put her on the ones that repair a damaged thyroid. She says, you know what? I've got thyroid hormones in my blood. Well, it turned out within about 6 months she was off all Synthroid. Her thyroid specialist couldn't understand it. I sure didn't expect it. Her thyroid produces all the thyroid hormone it's supposed to, and has for years. She hasn't been on any Synthroid in years. They test her blood, it's normal. The power that makes these bodies is a pretty awesome power to reckon with. And it's the only power that fixes bodies, by the way. And it's nice when you can work with it and let it do its job than working against it and trying to second guess it and slice it up and dice it up and chop it and mince it and add all this industrial waste and strange chemical toxins and brew to it. And instead of doing those heavy-handed things, if you can work with what life needs and work with life intelligence in terms of what it's about, you can often be way ahead of the game. And that's, to me, for most of the problems that we run into in life with health, is the smart way to go. Instead of going with a heavy-handed approach of very strong drug-related chemicals or surgery, let's whack out this ovary, let's cut out that thyroid, let's remove your knee cartilage. How about keeping those things and doing the things that are necessary to let your body heal them and rebuild them and get them working right again? Wouldn't that be a better approach? Now, it was very interesting. When I studied Donna's neck, I'm going to go through another thing that your glands need to be healthy. Here's a picture of a normal neck from a side view. Happens to be my neck. It's got a C-curve in it. That's the perfect C-curve for a neck. And all the discs are even and evenly spaced. This is the picture of Donna's neck who had Graves' disease. You can't see it? If you take a look here, you'll see that instead of the C-curve this neck is supposed to have, it goes backwards between number 5 and 6. Instead of going this way, it's going backwards. The 5th and 6th vertebra in the neck that sit right here in your neck your whole neck's supposed to have a C-curve. Hers goes backwards at number 5 and 6. I did a study. This was years ago. The original film was taken back in the 80s. I did a study of all my patients who had either been put on Synthroid for the rest of their life or had a thyroid surgery or been diagnosed with hyperthyroidism and been told to take radioactive iodine or drugs to slow up their thyroid function. And I looked at the x-rays of every patient who had ever had severe thyroid disease in my practice. When I looked at their neck x-rays, something very interesting showed up. A very interesting percentage of them had a reverse curve at number 5 and 6 in their neck. That percentage was 100% of them had a reversed curve in their neck on the nerve that goes to your thyroid gland that comes out of your lower neck. Wow, 100% of them. KT came to me yesterday for the first time. This is an x-ray I took on her yesterday. She had Graves' disease. It nearly killed her. Turned into a walking skeleton, right? No muscle tone, half dead, sicker than sick. What do you notice about that neck? Reverse curve, fully reversed at cervical 5 and 6. Does she fit the 100% rule? Right on. 100% of every case I've ever seen with treated thyroid disease has had a reverse curve at cervical 5 and 6. Does that have anything to do with it? Just like iodine has anything to do with it? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Because the lifeline of the body, we covered this last week, are your nerves. And one of the most common places for nerves to get short-circuited out and pinched is in your spine. It does turn out that the most common place to pinch a nerve in the neck, one of the very most common, is at number 5 and 6, where it can go from a normal C curve to a reverse curve, from things like a whiplash injury. So when I met KT the other day and she started to tell me her story, I said, "Did you have a car accident 6 months or a year before your Graves' disease?" And she said, "Fell off a horse." That's another good way to do a neck, by the way. Fall off a horse. Think of another one. Dive into a pool and hit your head on the bottom. There's a few good ways to do it. Now, you could ask a medical doctor how many times they ever asked a Graves' disease patient, "Did you fall off a horse?" How many times, Dr. Ricard, did you ever get trained to ask that? 0 times. They don't ask it. Because they don't think. They study nerves over here for a long time. You spent how many hours studying nerves? So many, right? You could name them in Latin. To pass the boards, you got to call these nerves by name like you were counting sheep. But call them all by name. And they know all about the glands and hormones. You studied all that for hundreds of hours. And we know there's a connection between nerves and glands. It's in every physiology book Dr. Ricard and every MD ever studied. But when it comes down to the practical matter of what the nerves in your neck have to do with your thyroid gland, does a medical doctor know one thing about it? Never trained a single thought into their system of knowledge to look for that. Not once. Not once. I can tell you that patients come in here and they sit through this workshop and I go through this section and they'll raise their hands and they'll go, "Just before I gained all that weight, I had that huge car accident." You know how many people that happens to? And does it happen the next day? Not usually, because you got to have a pinched nerve, and then that's got to shut down the energy flow to that gland, and then that gland's got to wear itself down or rev itself up or get crazed enough for things to happen. That can be months later. So you don't put 2 and 2 together because this happened in December and that problem didn't come till the following January a year later. And no one puts those 2s and 2s together. Now we've mentioned 2 things that are essential to glandular health. You're going to have nutrition. We're not done with that one. You're going to have nerve supply. You got to have nerve energy getting to every organ. You think your stomach works when you don't get nerve energy to it? Let me tell you, it fails. Do you think your arm muscle works when it doesn't get nerve energy to it? Of course it fails. Do you think your intestines are going to eliminate when they don't get proper nerve energy because there's a pinched nerve? It fails. And do you think a thyroid gland is going to work without nerve energy coming out of the lower neck to it? Of course not. As soon as that wiring is messed with, a person has a problem. A very primary factor of gland health is the nerve supply. The nerve energy getting to it. Yes. 6. It's not always high. It can be high or low. Let me clarify that. Are we rolling again? So let me clarify a point here. I found that 100% of the patients who had either hyper or hypothyroidism that had been diagnosed and treated, 100% of them had reversed neck curves at the cervical 5-6 level of the spine. either high or low. Why do some go high and some go low? I think we can treat that concept for you before we're done with the other glands here, because they interrelate the different glands. Anyone here who's ever had thyroid problems that I haven't tested? I think most of you have been patients here, but is there anyone I haven't tested and fixed? Come on up. Let me borrow you for a little test here. We'll volunteer. And your name is?
Diana.
Hi, Diana. Let's have you lie on your back here. Now, so far as we talked about glands, you could go to your medical doctor and he could draw blood. And there are a lot of different glands we listed there. So if he wanted to check all the hormones from all of those glands, boy, he's going to draw tubes and tubes of blood. You're going to feel like you had a bad night with a vampire. And then he's going to send all that out and have to run test after test after test for every one of those hormones. Does that happen to people? Hardly ever. It doesn't happen much. Do they test all the hormones in your body? Boy, that hardly ever happened to any of you. Should it have happened to you if you wanted to get your glands straight? Well, if that was the only way you could test them, it should have. We discovered something very interesting. In the early 1970s, one of our most brilliant researchers in chiropractic, and chiropractic is the largest natural health care profession in the world where we do not rely on drugs and surgery for treatment. And in the state of California, when the chiropractic law was passed, all the natural healing methods that were then employed were grandfathered into the chiropractic law. So chiropractic is the natural healing profession that was legislated in for the state of California. And when Dr. Goodhart, one of our top chiropractic researchers, was working with Olympic athletes in the early 1970s, he was the first chiropractor appointed and allowed to officially work on the Olympic committees. He was testing Olympic swimmers, and he would be testing their muscles. He ran into something pretty odd, and that something odd is going to enable us to find out a lot about a person's glands in a short period of time. And he was testing a swimmer's arm, and Diana, hold your arm real strong, and find out how strong her arm is in this position. We go, that's pretty darn strong. I can feel how much strength is in it before it's going to cave in. And it's normal for a woman of her size. That's a normal sort of arm strength. Not weak, not out of range, very, very normal. And he was testing these Olympic swimmers because if he found a weak muscle, he would want to strengthen it so that the person could swim better, so that the Americans could win more gold medals in the Olympics. And he was testing a strong swimmer's muscle, and all of a sudden that person might touch a point on their body, and all of a sudden their strong muscle went really weak. He'd say, gee, I wonder what that's about. They might touch another point on their body, and it wouldn't go weak. I touch here, and she stays the same strength. But when I touch here, she loses all strength. Now, at first, Dr. Goodhart was scratching his head, wondering, what have I run into here? He didn't know what he had come upon. But now, 20-some years later, we've not only figured out what he came upon, we've got books and books of information of what we can do with muscle tests in terms of figuring out what's going on with the human body. And we can use those for so many things. I used it an hour ago to find out what was wrong with a person's knee cartilage. I used it for you to fix your shoulders that had bothered you for how long? Number of months. And how long did it get to feel better?
Just less than a week.
Less than a week. And with muscle tests, we were able to find out what was wrong with his shoulder. Now, let's say we wanted to find out how a person's thyroid gland is doing. It turns out, in chiropractic and in acupuncture, they're the two professions where we've been very interested in points on the body. Much more than medical doctors, we've been mapping out points that relate to your gallbladder, your liver, your thyroid, different points that relate to your body. And we know the thyroid points, the key ones are right here on the throat. So we test a strong muscle, and if we want to know if her right thyroid lobe is good, I'll touch her right lobe. Doesn't change her muscle strength. We don't pick up a problem there. We'll try the middle lobe. She goes totally weak when I hit the middle of her thyroid. Let's try the left side. Totally weak. Hold strong. Here's how strong she is. I hit this side of her thyroid. It's just an off switch for her. No power at all. Doesn't happen on the right. Happens in the middle. Happens on the left. What's going on here? Well, what we've learned is that when we touch a body part or a point on the body that relates to a body part that's in trouble, and signals are sent up to the brain, and the brain goes, wait a second, Mayday, oh my God, something's wrong over here. It distracts it, and we tell it this stupid idea, just hold that arm or that leg strong. Well, it'll normally do that, but when it's distracted, it goes, well, wait a second, I've got this problem here, and it can't do it for that moment. So her middle thyroid and her left thyroid say there's a problem on those two sections, but not on her right. Now, there's something very interesting about your spine, which is if it's all lined up, then these two nerve openings will both be open, right and left. But if it twists to one direction, this shows both nerves getting pinched, but if you really look, you'll notice it's one side that really tends to pinch, and the other side stays open. So it'll pinch to one side when a vertebra twists into a misalignment. And by the way, these people with thyroid disorders have vertebrae that have either jammed forward or twisted. We might wonder, did her vertebra twist so that it's pinching the left nerve and not the right? Maybe so. Could we test it? Well, here's one test. Don't go away. Hold your head up and turn it this way. Let's test the muscle on this side of her neck that happens to be connected to the C5 nerve and see if it can hold her head up. Don't let me push down. On the right side, it's pretty strong. Let's check it on the left side and see what it's doing. Hold it up. Don't let me push down. It's totally weak. Wait, look at that. Here's the right side. I can lean in a lot of force. Here's the left side. I barely touch it. It falls over. What's going on with her neck? Completely weak left neck flexor muscles. This muscle that's a real mouthful, and it's called the sternocleidomastoideus muscle. It flexes your neck. You got one here, you got one here. This one's firing, this one ain't. This thyroid's working, this one ain't. They're both connected to the same nerve. What do we know when we're going to shoot a neck x-ray of her? Well, you got a real good bet she's got a C5 problem. You want to bet? Any amount of money. What do you think? That x-ray is going to show it. But here's the thing. See, now she could go to her doctor. Did they test your thyroid? Did they find it normal or low?
Low.
Low. Now they found hers low. And probably the truth is the right lobe of her thyroid is probably overactive. And the middle and the left are probably way underactive. And when you add up the high and the low of it all, there's still not enough to bring her to normal, and she's low. But let me tell you, you might have run that test 5 years ago. Do you know when you hurt your neck? Do you remember having heard it? No, she doesn't remember it. You might have run a blood test on her 5 years ago, and the doctor said, you know what? Your thyroid levels are normal. They're sort of on the low side of normal, but they're normal. And you know what might have been true at that point? Her right side could have been way overworking. Her left side was way underworking. And the two of them were balancing out to normal. Did she have a thyroid problem? Yes. Did the blood test show it? No. Why? It couldn't tell the difference between right and left. There's some things that muscle tests do better than blood tests because this tells me which side of her gland isn't working, and it even tells me what to look for on why one side isn't working and the other side is. Her blood test could have covered up that problem, maybe did for years, until it couldn't anymore, until the side that was so pinched finally got so low that it wasn't working anymore. Thanks very much, Diane. Let me let you grab a seat. Now let's say you got hyperthyroid condition and you go to the doctor and he wants to cut your thyroid or nuke your thyroid and he kills it off and you come back and he goes, I got great news for you, Kath. What's that? Your tests look great. They're perfect. You go, wow, the operation was a success. Yeah, the radioactive iodine that nuked your thyroid was a success. You go, oh great, whoopee, I'm normal. And what happens? You go, this is great. Wow, you know, my levels are normal. My heart's not going so fast. This is cool, boy. Modern medicine's got me wired. This is a triumph for me. Then a year goes by. Another year goes by. And suddenly that person goes, oh, Boy, am I tired. Seem to be putting on weight. Don't have much energy. Feeling pretty depressed. Wonder what's happening. Back to the thyroid specialist, draws some blood, and he says, gee, who would have thought it? Wow, I never would have thought it. Why, wasn't it just 2 years ago that you were hyperthyroid? Well, now you're too low. You're hypothyroid. And you say, really? He says, yeah, that's why you're feeling terrible. Why'd that happen? We don't know. But we got a solution for you. And he takes out his prescription pad, and here's your Synthroid for the rest of your life. What he's not thinking with is something that was proven about glands. In fact, the Nobel Prize was given when this was proven about glands. When you drive a gland into overwork for a period of time, what do you eventually get to? Eventually you get to exhaustion. You wear it out. And when you break it down and wear it down, you go from too high. Well, now you left the person with 50% of their gland, which was overproducing and giving them 100% of their hormone. Wow, looks great on paper. Except what happens when that 50% of the gland that's working double time burns itself out and finally is producing 50% of the hormone you need? Oh, you're low. Who would have thought that? Like it's the newest thing that ever happened. It never happened before. Oh, we'll just write you a script, give you some thyroid hormone. That's the solution, you see. Now we talk about nutrition. And basically, when you talk about the biochemical nutritional side of health, you got two main issues to consider when you talk about glands, two main ones. Nutritional issue one is the factory built? And nutritional issue two is, does the factory have the raw materials to build the product? You got two issues. Well, what happens with an organ that's not getting enough nerve communication and then not getting enough arterial blood, because nerves control all the arteries go into an area, so it's not getting enough blood, and it starts to break down and it's too low and it's worn out and the cells aren't strong anymore? The factory's broken. What would you want to do nutritionally? Repair the gland, repair the factory, right? Pretty simple concept. A genius inventor, a dentist by profession, an inventor by profession, both. A fellow named Dr. Royal Lee, who was a very celebrated, successful inventor in the Second World War. He invented, amongst other things, the bomb sights that enabled American bombs to land where they wanted them to drop on Germany, so they blew up the right thing. A thing called the Norton bomb sight was one of his inventions. He was a multimillionaire. He was a dentist, he was an inventor. He loved nutrition. I think a lot more than he loved bombs. Although at that point, getting bombs to land in the right place was a pretty good idea. But he loved nutrition. And at first he was interested as a dentist in why people who had healthy teeth suddenly ended up living on some island where their teeth had been healthy and their teeth fell apart after the British arrived. You know, what was the story? Why did their teeth fall out of their heads? That was where he started with nutrition. Before he was done, he provided us with a very interesting technology. He realized that people's glands were very important to health. Their thyroid gland, we only talked about the thyroid, we got bunches of others to discuss before we're done. We're going to touch on all of them before we're done, a lot of the important ones. He realized that people's thyroids and pituitaries and adrenals and ovaries were very important to health. And when they weren't working right, people had big health problems. And he realized that medicine was doing then pretty much what it's doing now, just doing it a bit worse. You know, they were cutting on people and giving them drugs, and it wasn't fixing people's glands. It was covering up problems. It was stuffing crutches under their arms, but it wasn't fixing them. And he asked himself a question. He said, well, so if I had a person with broken down thyroid, and I wanted that thyroid to be repaired, what could I give a person that would enable them to repair their thyroid? Logical question. Not one they ask in medicine very often, though. Guess how many times in the daily practice of a medical doctor he asks himself the question, how should I repair your thyroid? Hasn't happened. How should I repair your adrenal glands? Doesn't happen. How should I repair that cyst on your ovary instead of opening you up and cutting your ovary out? Doesn't happen. Because that particular thing, as logical and obvious and basic as it is as a question and answer, doesn't exist within modern medical technology as a question. They'll never come with the answer. You don't ask the question. Wrong question, never get to the answer. No question. But he asked that question. He said, well, I wonder if I went to some healthy cows who were running around who have thyroid glands virtually identical to ours, whose thyroxine is virtually identical to ours. Remember, when they want to give a person thyroxine, they take it from pigs. They'll give you pig thyroxine. It's almost identical to ours. Cow thyroxine, virtually identical. I wonder if I took, he said, the healthy thyroid glands of an animal and did the opposite of what medicine did. What if I took out the hormone and instead of feeding the person who needed repair the hormone and throwing away the gland, what if I took all the hormone out, threw it away, and gave the person the gland? Would they then have the building blocks to repair their own gland? Would they have all the things that were in a healthy gland to build it? But if you didn't give them the hormone, you wouldn't be messing with this control loop. I didn't develop that for you, but I sure better. I really left something out, so we better go back to it. See, when they give you Synthroid and you hit 100, what happens to your gland stat? Oh, we got plenty. What does it tell your thyroid gland? Take a break, pal. We got all we need. It shuts it down. But wait, didn't you have a gland that was doing too little? And now you've told that gland to take a vacation? You don't need to do as much? Isn't that the worst management you could ever have? If you had a person in your organization and they weren't doing enough work, would you say, great, pal, let me give you a bonus and send you to Hawaii for 3 weeks? You don't manage like that. And that's why drug management of hormone replacement therapy is essentially bad management, because of life intelligence, which is a control system monitoring the amount of hormone, reads that hormone you just gave it and says, take a break. In a moment you'll find out what happens when you give a person cortisone, what it tells their adrenal glands. Well, die is what it tells them. Take a break and shrivel up and die. That's what it tells the adrenals. And what does it tell your thyroid? Hey, we don't need you. And what happens to an organ that isn't being used generally in the human body? Shrinks and atrophies. What happens to an organ that's being told to do a lot more? Grows and rises to the occasion, right? So every time you use hormone therapy, replacing hormones into the human body, what are you telling your own glands? Don't need you no more. We're full up. Got all your stuff we need, thanks, pal. Take a break, and by the way, shrivel up and die if you want. We don't need you. Bad management. Undesirable management. Yeah, 2 plus 2 equals 4. 4 minus 2 equals 2. But you're dealing with life, not little blocks of wood, not pieces of vinyl. We're dealing with a living system where life intelligence has a design. We've only shaped some of that design. We'll get some more of it done before we're through tonight. What was the idea I was just giving you? Oh yeah, Royal Lee. So Royal Lee says, what if I give a person all the raw material of a healthy thyroid, of a healthy adrenal, of a healthy ovary, but we take out all the fat? By the way, hormones are fat and oil based. In fact, you need good oils to make hormones. You want to know another way to crash your body? Don't have the right oils in your system. You want to know something else that makes hormones? Protein. You want to know another way to crash the hormones of your body? Don't eat any protein. See, if you don't eat protein and you don't have good oil, you can't make hormones either. But knowing that hormones are oil-based, he slurries out all the oil-based material out of a thyroid gland and makes a product like thytrophin. What is it? The opposite of medical treatment. The opposite of hormone replacement therapy. No hormone in it. It's the building blocks to repair your factory. With what? Good quality tissue that has what? All the things that needed to be there. Because when you realize how this system works, you want to have all the parts there. They should all be built right. All the raw materials need to be there to make the product, and you better have the wiring working. See, a medical doctor, if he were an air conditioning specialist and heating specialist, he'd have a really wild idea. He'd run into this room and you'd say, my air conditioner's broken. And he'd look like Groucho Marx or something. He'd go, oh, yeah, it's hot in here. It's hot in here. Your air conditioner's broken. Well, I know what to do. And he'd order a big chunk of ice from the North Pole. He'd have it flown in and he'd stick it in the corner of the room. There's really not enough cold in this room. And you'd be thinking, well, gee, why don't you fix my air conditioner? No, 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 there's not enough cold in this room. That's the hormone replacement approach. He came into that room and it was 60 degrees. And you go, my air conditioner is nuts. It must be stuck. I mean, I set it at 70. It's 60 in here. We're freezing our tushes. We can't put a patient in a gown, but they're freezing. And he'd come in and he'd say, I know what to do. And he'd grab a fire axe off the wall and he'd say, where's your air conditioner? He'd start hacking away at it. He said, this is way too big an air conditioner. You need half an air conditioner this size. This thing is so big for a room this size. Look how cold it is in here. And he'd cut off your air conditioner. He'd start throwing parts out in the street. And you'd go, you're nuts, pal. Because you'd want an air conditioning guy to know the thermostat's over there, the compressor's up here, there's supposed to be some gas in those tubes. There shouldn't be any holes in them. There's a motor that better spin that compresses it. There's a fan that better blow. There's wires that connect all of that. There's a fuse box over there. It better be turned on. You know, the circuit breakers better be getting some power. That thermostat better have wires that are getting to there. If rats went in the walls and ate the wires, we'd have some problems. You'd want an air conditioner guy who knew all that. And he'd know, oh, well, you know, we better get this wired up and that better be there and we better have the thermostat there and there should better be some gas, and he'd know what to fix. You wouldn't have him go whacking out part of your air conditioner and throwing it away. You wouldn't have him go bringing cold into the room. You'd want the machine fixed. Well, nutritionally, we can take thiotrophine or Adrenal or Simplex F. I'll show you what these products are. And we can repair glandular systems. Because one of the things you're going to want to do is you're going to want to have all the glands built properly with all the essential raw materials to repair them. And if you've been getting older and you've got wiring problems and nutritional problems and you've been wearing down systems of your body, if you want to know how you turn the hands of time backwards and you start getting younger, get your glands working. I have patients come in here and they've got menopause and they're 44 years old. Sometimes they're 54 years old. And they come in here and they got all these hot flashes and they're exhausted and they feel horrible and their knees hurt and their stomach isn't good and they go on and they're depressed and we test out their glands. I'll run through all their glands. I'll show you in a minute. We'll test a person's glands. I'll test their whole gland system in 42 seconds. Not $1,000 in unmarked bills over to your endocrinologist and saying, hey, run every test you can think of, and he still doesn't think of important ones to run. But we can test the whole gland system in a minute. And put them on the right nutrients, and that menopausal woman gets her period back. I'm not always the most popular person at that point. But I say to him, look, on the bright side, you're 15 years younger than you were last month. Hey, that's happened over and over again. They come to me and they can't get pregnant, and they've been to fertility clinics, and they've taken wacky, weird drugs that made them insane, and they tried to kill their husband, and they're on Clomid, and they've done all kinds of wild stuff, and they've done all kinds of demeaning tests. They've spent thousands of dollars, and they can't get pregnant. And we put them on the right glandular support, and we test out their low back, and we find out the nerves to their ovaries are in trouble, and we fix it, and they're pregnant, and they give birth to beautiful babies. Glandular repair. Not bypassing and replacing and hacking away, repairing what was supposed to work. There's a patient in this audience where we've been repairing her ovaries. I saw a patient tonight. She came to me about 8 weeks ago with an ovarian cyst the size of a grapefruit. Guess what her doctor wanted to do? Take out her ovary. When? Now. And when I told her I've not missed yet on dissolving an ovarian cyst, we've done it 100% of the time on every patient I've ever treated, she goes, well, okay. She wasn't thrilled about any of it, but she was less thrilled at the idea of having surgery than the idea of dissolving it naturally. And she's gone back to her doctor, and her ovary's little, and the cyst is gone. And she's a happy camper, and her swelling in her abdomen's down. And she even had an infection in the ovary, and it had to go. We had to use certain nutrients to kill the infection. You can even use nutrients to kill infections. In some cases, they even work better than antibiotics. There's some cases where antibiotics don't kill the infection, and nutrients do. I've seen it. So we had to kill the infection in her big swollen cystic ovary, and we had to normalize her glands and let her body dissolve that cyst out of that ovary, and she's healthy. Is that better than having your ovary out for the rest of your life and now missing half your female hormones for the rest of your life? And some doctor telling you, I'm going to have to replace your hormones. You're going to have to take birth control pills and progesterone in pill form for the rest of your life so you can take somebody else's hormone to replace what yours should have been making? Well, what do you think? And we do it with nutrients. And we do it by correcting nerves. Two of the most important things that we do. Now, let's talk about some other glands. Let's talk about the pituitary, and then we'll talk about the most important gland. The pituitary is an interesting one. Pretty darn important, too. There's your brain. Your pituitary sits, this little pea-sized guy there inside your brain. That's your pituitary. Now, the thyroid we talked about is a pretty unique gland. I told you it was unique because it produced one hormone, and that hormone talked to every cell. But most glands don't do that. Many of them produce bunches of hormones, not one, but 3 or 5. The pituitary produces bunches of them. And they don't talk to every gland. Each of those hormones talks to special areas, and others tend to ignore it. For instance, one of the pituitary hormones is it makes tiny little drops of a little liquid hormone called thyroid stimulating hormone. That's known as TSH. Your pituitary makes thyroid stimulating hormones as one of its hormones. What does that stuff do? When your pituitary makes TSH and tiny drops of that go into your bloodstream, TSH is actually the thing, the material that communicates to who? Your thyroid. And not to everybody else? Yep, not to everybody else. Thyroid stimulating hormone communicates to your thyroid and tells your thyroid to make more thyroxine. So when your pituitary makes more TSH, your thyroid is told, make more thyroxine. In fact, as you look at this control system that's keeping your thyroid levels normal, you got your gland-stat nerve over here, sending signals eventually up to where? The brain. Why is the pituitary sitting in the center of your brain? Why did it pick that piece of real estate? Remember the pituitary when you studied in school? They called it the master gland, didn't they? The master gland. What were they talking about? This is the gland that's an executive. It's in charge of other glands. It's giving orders to the other glands. And it chose this piece of real estate. It's sitting in the center of your brain. How come it's not in your big toe on your right foot? Why did it pick your brain? Central computing? Why is it in central computing? Why is it in the place that the nerve centers of the body send up information to central computing? Why is it sitting in central computing? Because it's getting direct orders from central computing. It's directly hardwired into it. For those of you that are brain freaks, it's hardwired into this area called the hypothalamus, which has nerves that go right into your pituitary. So what's the real control system? Glandstat is going to measure the amount of thyroid hormone. Okay, I need some more. It tells brain. Brain tells pituitary. Pituitary has to put out TSH. That circulates in your blood all through your body. But who reads that message? This one isn't addressed to occupant. This one's addressed to the thyroid. And the thyroid goes, oh, this one's for me. Make more thyroxine. Okay, boss. And it makes more thyroxine. And then when you got enough thyroxine, Glandstat says what? Got plenty, boss. Tells who? Brain. Brain tells who? Wired right into pituitary. Pituitary says, oh, don't need more TSH, cuts back. Tells thyroid what? Take a break. Now this leads to some interesting problems like you have, KT. What happens if the pituitary is being told the wrong thing? Could it be producing too much TSH and creating too much thyroxine? Is that what happened with you? Were your TSH levels too high? Mm-hmm. Yeah. How could it be that a pituitary gland would be told to produce too much of this stuff and blow the whole system out of whack? Could happen. We'll see how it could happen. I'll show you how it happened to you. Now, there are other hormones coming out of the pituitary. How about ACTH, the one that talks to your adrenal glands and tells them when you need more stuff? How about one that talks to your ovaries and tells them to produce more hormones? How about the fact that your pituitary has stimulating hormones that are talking to all the major glands in your body, telling them what to do? It's part of the chain of command. It's the chief executive gland wired into chief executive nerve computer that's the chain of command that's telling your glands, give me more or give me less. A very important part of the control system that you'd want to understand, just like you want to understand thermostat, compressor, motor, power line, wire connecting. You got to understand this if you're going to fix any of these. So if the pituitary started putting out a bunch of extra TSH and all of a sudden your body started producing too much thyroxine, they call it Graves' disease, but they don't know why it happened. But they do know they should kill your thyroid. That's what they do know. Let's kill your thyroid. Something wrong with that picture? Hey, you already know there's something wrong with that picture. Let's talk about the most common gland that people screw up, their adrenals. Here's the one most people mess up first, more frequently even than their thyroid. Thyroid's going to be second. The adrenals, two guys that sit on top of your kidneys. Kidney, kidney, adrenal, adrenal. Got a right adrenal and a left one. The pituitary is only the size of a pea. The adrenals are only the size of marbles. These little guys are busy though, and very important. Now next week, just to give you some forward look to where we're going next week, we're going to deal with adrenals, pancreas, and liver in detail. 3 important glands of your energy system. And we're going to cover them in more detail than we will tonight, because these guys are so important. But we're going to touch on them tonight. The adrenals, the man who proved they were the stress-relating glands of the human body won the Nobel Prize. And he proved that when a person or an animal was under stress, their adrenals would go wildly active, trying to pull them through the stress. And if they stayed stressed for a period of time, weeks and then months, they would eventually go from overactive, what he called alarm phase activity, to exhaustion. And they would exhaust themselves and wear themselves out and burn themselves out. The stress glands called the adrenals. And they produce some very important hormones. They produce adrenaline that gives you what? Fight or flight mechanism, we call it, right? Energy to your lungs, to your heart, to your muscles of your arms and legs, so you can run, so you can climb a tree, so you can punch a saber-toothed tiger in the nose, so you can run like the wind, so you can fight, so you can defend. Adrenaline. They produce the blood sugar boosting hormone, the glucose group, very critical. We're going to discuss this whole area in detail next week because blood sugar is the fuel of the body, and the adrenals have the job of keeping blood sugar from crashing. And they're part of the control system that controls your blood sugar with a glucostat system, the way we're talking tonight about the glandstat system controlling your hormone levels. There's a blood sugar controlling system that works also like a thermostat, and the adrenals are part of the machinery. They have to bring your blood sugar up between meals so that you don't crash. so that you don't get exhausted, so that an hour after you eat, your head doesn't fall forward. You're going, man, I'm not going to make it through the afternoon. I need another jolt of caffeine, sugar, something to get me through. They produce the body's cortisone, very, very important hormone. A guy came to me last week. He had the worst kind of colitis known to man. It's called Crohn's disease. They already took out half of his colon surgically. And they told him he was getting so bad again they were going to go and take the other half. And he drove a long ways to see me because someone told me, better get up here and see me. And I started to fix his adrenals and the nerves to his colon. It's been 1 week of treatment. He's off all medication, all his diarrhea stopped, all his colon problems stopped, his migraine headache stopped, and he knows he's already basically cured. All that's done now is finish up. 7 days. They were going to take out the other half of his colon. They were going to do it to my dad. He's still got his colon. He's 78 now. I had to fly to Cleveland and stop him from taking out his colon. My girlfriend who was here tonight, ulcerative colitis all her young life. Migraine headaches all her life. Drugs, drugs, and more drugs. Rheumatoid arthritis all her life. Couldn't walk, couldn't move, couldn't walk a shopping mall. Colon ruined. Off all drugs, all medications, no colitis, no migraines, no arthritis, less than a month. $500 in medications every month of her life they had her doped up on, the best doctors. What? Adrenals, adrenals, adrenals. Cortisone is the strongest anti-inflammatory substance known to man. It is the anti-inflammatory hormone. It will shut down swelling, pain, redness. Swelling, pain, redness, inflammation, heat. It'll do it better than anything else in the world. Wow, then you should use it for everything. I mean, man, it should be like Sherwin-Williams paint, man. You should just cover the world with this stuff because it shuts off pain, it shuts down swelling. I mean, everybody should be on some of this stuff. Yeah. If 2 + 2 = 4, then everybody should just be taking cortisone every day. Otherwise, it would make life wonderful. Hey, there's no drug more deadly. There's nothing that'll leave you more crippled. Because why? What happens when you take cortisone and the doctor puts you on 40 milligrams, 60 milligrams a day and says, take this for the next 3 months, 6 months? Well, your Glandstat mechanism measures the amount of cortisone in your blood. It signals up to your pituitary saying, we've never seen this much cortisone, pal. Whoa, look at the amount in this guy's blood. Have we got plenty? More than enough. More than we ever saw in our wildest imaginings do we have cortisone in our blood. And tells the pituitary what? I don't need any adrenal stimulating hormone. No ACTH for me, pal. And adrenocorticotropic hormone, the hormone that grows and pushes the adrenals, shuts it down. And when it shuts down that adrenal stimulating hormone and these adrenals are told, please don't produce any hormones. We got all we need. And they start to shrivel up and die. And you can't produce this, 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 and I'm not even done with the hormones yet. Boy, are you in deep trouble? Have you just taken the most harmful drug maybe in the entire medical bag of tricks? Yes. Should most people learn to say no to cortisone? Yes. Unless it's a life-saving instance. If it's the one thing that's going to keep your lungs from shutting down because you didn't know how to cure asthma, so you got it so bad you're in an emergency and you're not going to draw your next breath, and they want to hit you with cortisone to keep you breathing or from bleeding to death that second, then maybe it's the best thing for you. But for management of your rheumatoid arthritis, of your ulcerative colitis, of all these things, is it always the best choice? Whoa. I tell people, I'd rather have a person addicted to heroin than cortisone because heroin's much kinder to the human body. Heroin leaves you nicely preserved. You can live a nice long life. The lifestyle of crime and dirty needles ain't so good, but the heroin itself is pretty mellow. Cortisone isn't. I had a friend who did autopsies and dissected bodies. And when he dissected a body that had been on extensive cortisone therapy, he told me he could not get the world's sharpest scalpel to go through the adrenal glands of a person who had been on long-term cortisone therapy. They had turned to glass hard as rocks. They couldn't do a thing. You want to know the toughest patients to get well with natural health care? Cortisone addicts. You want to try to get a person who's addicted to cortisone? By the way, when you're taking that hormone and you shut the whole system down and atrophied your adrenals, are you addicted? Can you just get off cortisone? Why does it say in the medical text they got to ramp these people gradually off of cortisone? You can't just go from 60 milligrams to 0 tomorrow, because they'll do what? Up and die on you. That's what they'll do. So do you want to get on a lot of cortisone? I mean, I could tell you a terrible tale. Everybody needs a terrible tale. Let me tell you one. My office manager has a hard time managing the health of her parents because they live out of town. I have a little bit of a hard time managing the health of my parents. They live in Cleveland, Ohio. But I got them all alive and on nutrients and off drugs, and they aren't taking all that junk they used to think you needed to stay alive. And they're outliving all their friends. And sooner or later, if you live right, you get to bury all your friends, unfortunately, because you're going to outlive them. But anyhow, my office manager, Ellen, who's been my long-standing friend, and her mother and dad are sweethearts. Well, her dad developed a problem, and he lives out of town, and they decided to put him on cortisone to solve the problem. Within a month, he had developed a severe lung emphysema, and he couldn't breathe from the cortisone. So he had to ride with tubes in his nose, and he had shut down his lungs. By the way, cortisone will give you inflammatory problems because it shuts down your anti-inflammatory system while it's covering up some symptoms. Made him deadly sick in the lungs, and he'd only come up and see me every once in a while. And whenever he saw me and I did some things for him, he'd get remarkably better. And then he'd go away, decide he was so good, he'd take his mobile home and go drive around the country and get remarkably sick, and then end up back at his doctor's again, and they'd give him more drugs. Well, the cortisone started a downhill spiral for him that was just horrible, made him sicker and sicker. And he got to the point where he wasn't breathing too well, so he went to a new doctor, another specialist, and they put him on 2 drugs. And when he went over to Thrifty's to fill the prescription, the pharmacist said to him, "You can't take these 2 drugs together. It says right in my computer, these 2 have a harmful drug interaction. You can't take them both together." It's right here in the computer, because now they got computerized all these drug relationships, and the pharmacists have it come up right on the screen when you order 2 of them at the same time. They don't go together. So Ellen's mom called up the doctor and said, "They said you can't take these 2 drugs together. They don't react well." And he said, no, I really think you need them both. He'll need to take them both. He took them both. He was dead in 2 days. Blood chemistries went wildly out of control within 24 hours. They couldn't stabilize him. They loaded him into a hospital. He was in a coma and then dead within 48 hours. And the mom's still in shock. She just lost her husband like that. Just stupid. Just the wrong thing. I forgot which 2 they were. Do you remember which 2 they were, Doc? I don't know if you heard the story. I don't even remember now. It was a few weeks ago I heard it. No, it wasn't even cortisone. He was already on the cortisone. The cortisone had made these other problems. It had swelling in his heart and all this other stuff developed after the fact because this drug shuts down your adrenals. It also produces your salt balancing hormone. This one talks to your kidneys, the salt hormone, and tells your kidneys to hold on to salt and don't pee it out in the urine. You'll find people whose adrenals are exhausted are peeing a tremendous amount of salt into their urine. For years, I ran urine tests on my patients when I tested their adrenals, because we run a battery of tests for everybody's adrenals when they come in the door. And I used to always run a lab test to see how much salt was in their urine. When your adrenals are shot, you're peeing salt out at a tremendous rate. Now, doctors will tell you, oh, don't eat salt. It'll make you swell. Your ankles will swell. Your body will swell. Because salt sucks up water, makes you swell. That's right. You want to know something else? Lack of salt makes you swell. When you lack salt in your body, the tissues suck up water, and it makes you swell. Do you want to know a lot of people with swollen ankles and swollen hands and swollen tissues? They have too little salt because their adrenals are shot. Incredibly frequent is that. And those people crave salt, but their doctors are telling them not to eat salt. The truth is they're losing salt at a tremendous rate, and they need to replace it. And while their adrenals are sick, they will eat salt. You'll find people, they eat salt right out of the shaker when their adrenals are really shot. Maybe you know some people like that. They need tremendous amounts of salt because their adrenals are so weak. And it also produces backup estrogen, which becomes important in the menopausal female. It's the only source of estrogen a person after menopause has that keeps their body female naturally. And also there's a very important thing worth mentioning, I'll cover it in detail next time, called ligament stretch syndrome, where the adrenals become so weak in some individuals that their bodies are shot. They start spraining things, their joints hurt, their adrenals are completely worn out, they're tearing up tissues, their bodies hurt, they're exhausted, they're depressed, they don't have energy. And when the adrenals get exhausted, general exhaustion, or they hit this level of exhaustion called ligament stretch syndrome, and there's not enough adrenal hormones, what does your gland stat say? Give me more. Tells your brain what? Give me more. Tells your pituitary what? Give me more. But if the adrenals are all smushed and worn out, what can they do? They can't. They can't deliver the goods. And what happens? Can that circuit, as it keeps going, give me more, can't get any more. What happened when it happened to the thyroid? The thyroid went sort of nuts. All that thyroid stimulating hormone, if a person has no iodine, kept telling the thyroid, stimulate, 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 stimulate. Grew that giant goiter. Stupid. Well, then let's build a factory 20 times bigger than the one we need, but there's no raw material. What happens to the person whose adrenals are exhausted and the pituitary is saying, give me a lot more adrenal hormones, and it can't get any? Can the pituitary finally go psychotic? It does. Does it start kicking out other stimulating hormones like thyroid stimulating hormone? It does. And when the adrenals are that trashed, and then the pituitary goes into something we call pituitary push syndrome, is what we've called it. They don't even talk about this in medicine, do they, Doc? You ever heard about this? We discover this in natural health care. Pituitary push syndrome is where the adrenals, for instance, can get so low that they're telling the pituitary to push us, but they can't get any action, and they start pushing the others. Like pushing the thyroid with too much TSH. And all of a sudden the person has Graves' disease. They've already got a pinched nerve in their neck, and all the signals to their thyroid are screwy. And now their pituitary's pumping out hormones, and the thyroid just goes, well, I'll just rise to the occasion and pump out more thyroid hormone than you've ever seen. When all it was trying to do was get these adrenals to kick out some hormones, and they were thrashed. They were used up because the person ate too much carbohydrate. We'll cover that next week. Or because they were under too much stress. Or because they had too much pain. Or because they were too worried about their kid. Or because they were worried about the IRS. Or because, there's a lot of becauses. We're going to go in depth into this system next week. Because let me tell you, at the root of so many sick people are sick adrenal glands. And if you don't fix them, you don't get them well. And they populate doctors' offices and hospitals and emergency rooms, and they buy billions and trillions of dollars in dope, in hormones, in painkillers, in cover-ups, in crutches, and bullshit that they never needed because no one paid attention to the fact that the Nobel Prize was given to Dr. Selye when he discovered that the adrenals were the stress-relating glands and that these hormones were critical to life response and various stress factors. And I'll tell you, the stuff we're going to cover next week, when you understand the big picture of blood sugar, adrenals, inflammatory problems, autoimmune conditions, I don't think anyone's going to put all the pieces together for you the way we do next week anywhere. You won't find a book that's going to cover what we're going to cover next week, folks, until I get it written. Because there's a lot to this, and people like to look at one little part and think they understand it, and they look at another little part and think they understand it, and they don't realize the relationship of these parts to the big whole of human health, and hormones are very related in the big picture of human health. Is there anybody in this audience, again, I've tested many of you, who's sort of exhausted and hopeless and could never get well and nothing ever could get right? No one can fix them. They can't get out of pain. A chiropractor adjusts them. They can't hold an adjustment. everything's horrible and they're pretty depressed and there's not a chance anybody's going to ever fix them. Is there anyone like that in here?
No,
You fit?
I'm not depressed, but I have a lot of problems.
Got a lot of problems no one can fix? Come on up. Oh, watch it there. What's your name?
George,
George? Pleasure meeting you, George. Let's have you lie on your back here, George.
my back.
So let's start with this. If you wanted, now that you found something out about your glands, your pituitary, your adrenals, your testes that run your sex hormones and your sex drive, your thyroid, if you wanted to test these glands and you went to an endocrinologist, he's a gland specialist, and you say, okay, here's $350 for my first visit, and I came with $1,000 in unmarked bills for you to cover all the blood work, test every gland you can, doc, and run the most expensive gland test. See if you can test every hormone in my body, and he still probably wouldn't do it. Does anyone ever test all the hormones in the human body? Does it ever happen? Not in real practice. Maybe some research place in the middle of podunk somewhere they've done it on somebody, but it doesn't happen to you. It won't happen in your health care. It won't happen at UCLA. It won't happen at Kaiser Permanente. It won't happen at a doctor's office that they're going to test all your hormones. Never will happen. Never has. But if we wanted to test your hormones, we'll test your glands. George, right?
Right.
Right. Let's move this. I want to move the watch here. Take it off that left arm. So you got a